Pro from Pretoria. Is everything all right? People talk or say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front door.
Who says you weren't?
Them.
Who?
Them.
It was terrible out there. I could hear breathing.
We told you.
Are you worried about the man?
They hate us. That's the truth. They want to kill and torture every one of us. You can see it in their eyes.
Come now, Frederick. Do you dream about unholy things?
I really don't like what's going on here. There's something wrong, and that's a fact.
Wait. What did you dream last night? This manifestation of evil. You must be delivered from evil.
Kid, mind if I take a swig of milk?
Knock yourself out.
Ulcers. All I do these days is drink fucking milk.
My heart bleeds.
Yeah, well, so do my ulcers, you punk bastard. What the goddamn hell's this about? There's easier ways to commit suicide, you
There's
know.
a dead man downstairs who found a harder way.
Louis? If you killed Louis, so help me.
Campagna's okay. He'll have a headache to make a hangover seem like Christmas, but he's okay. Fatso, too.
Then who?
A blonde guy, I don't know his name, but I've seen him around.
Have you?
Last time was at Bayfront Park when you sent him to help kill Cermak. Time before that, I saw him running down Randolph Street when Capone sent him to kill Jake Lingle. And tonight, you sent him to kill Nate Heller. But he didn't quite get the job done, did he?
You're wrong on that last count, kid. Dead wrong.
Then you sent that son of a bitch to Florida just to catch some sun?
I didn't say I didn't send him to Florida. What I do say is I didn't send him to kill you.
He pushed me off a skyride tower tonight, Frank. And you know I really don't like heights. I should be a twisted sack of bones and meat on a morgue tray about now, but somehow I'm not. I'm here. He's dead, and so are you. So are you, Nitty. I wish to Christ Lang had killed you that afternoon. I wish to Christ I didn't make them call an ambulance for you.
Heller, I didn't send him. I didn't even know the bastard was in town. He doesn't work for me.
He doesn't work for anybody now.
Something you aren't at all aware of. Why am I not already dead?
The silenced automatic in my hand raised to aim itself at his forehead.
You are dead. Fuck you.
Wait, just wait. Lower that goddamn thing, will you? Just hear me out. I didn't say he never done work for me. He's a guy Johnny Torrio recommended to Al back on the Lingle deal. I used him later myself. Used him now and then on ticklish matters.
Oh, is that what I am? A ticklish matter?
Kid, I know how you feel. I know the kind of emotions you got running wild in you. I know all there is to know about revenge. You could ask 10% Tony if he wasn't in hell. But I didn't hire a contract on you. I swear by all that's holy.
And I'm supposed to believe that because of all the Catholic shit on the walls? Who sent him then, Frank?
I don't know the answer to that. Not for sure. But I can figure it out, and so can you, if you try.
I was getting confused, starting to wonder what the hell I was doing.
Kid.
Although edited for television, tonight's thriller contains scenes of suspense and violence which may be unsuitable for young viewers. Parental discretion is advised.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and, of course, the perhaps never-to-be-defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, moi, Robert Meyer Burnett. I'm, of course, Rob casting at you from right here in the Robservatory. You imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity. This is Robservations episode number 1044. For those of you who were here at the very beginning, you saw the trailer for White Devils, we are going to start distributing White Devils. And, it's a micro-budget movie, sort of our movie, and we figure there's a lot of ways that we can distribute it, And one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to have a screening for imagination connoisseurs for a nominal, small fee, but I'm going to put together a big screening of it once I figure out how to work this whole thing, probably on Vimeo. And then after the screening, director Gabe Bologna and I will talk about the film, and it'll just be kind of a night of how do you make an independent movie, and we'll show you the whole film, and I'm going to see how many people I can. I mean, I don't know what the limit is of people, but it'll be a specific time, probably in the next 2 weeks. I will keep you abreast of that. Also, I want to remind everybody I will be at the San Diego Comic-Con in case you want to come down. I will be doing a panel with Max Allan Collins on Friday afternoon. And, of course, on Thursday I'll be doing a panel. And Sunday, once again, we're doing Starship Smackdown. Now, listen, this is going to be a little different bill of fare. It's been really interesting to watch. Obviously, the world is in a strange place, tearing itself apart. Lots of crazy things happening on a daily basis. You just never know what's going to happen. Hey, we had a Democratic socialist win the primary in New York City. An interesting cat if you delve into his history. And of course, he's promoting that he wants to have city-run grocery stores. And I'm like, how's that going to work? And there's been a lot of talk, a lot of this talk about socialism. I hear a lot of young people talk, we're not very well off, and let's have socialism. And when I hear what I hear being said is that we want to be taken care of. That's what I hear. We don't want to have to struggle anymore. And I feel that is the ultimate example of the every kid gets a trophy generation. It used to be when I was growing up, hey, when the going gets tough, and our parents we're Gen X, we were expected to just survive. You've seen the videos, you've seen the memes and all that about Gen X. But one of the things that I always appreciated, and remember, right now there's all kinds of crazy discourse on the internet. People are yelling and screaming at each other about all kinds of things. And I just think to myself, I do feel grateful that I live in a place where people can go at each other, scream and yell at each other, and say what they want. People might come to blows. I don't think that's a good thing. But we do live in a time where we have the most incredible communications technology ever created. And at least for the time being, I mean, I'm sure it's going to get much more draconian in the next 5 or 10 years, especially when you have AGI able to shut you down as soon as you open your mouth, and that will happen. But right now, I keep thinking about how fortunate we are to live in the Western world at this point in time. Despite all the craziness, we still have a land, and Western civilization still is a place where individuals can be who they want to be. People can still speak up about the causes that they want to speak up for, whether I agree with them or not. But they still can speak up. And for the time being, we're getting it all out in the open. And I feel very privileged to live in a time where that is true. Now, lots of people, it always sort of makes me chuckle when people talk about colonization and ethno-states and all these buzzwords that you hear about, because that's the history of humanity. Humanity has always been about conquest. Find me a place on this planet that hasn't been conquered by somebody and reconquered by somebody else. Redrawn international lines after World War II. Call it what you want. But that is the history of humanity. Rightfully or wrongfully, that's just to the victor go the spoils. And that's just part of the way of the world. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, it just is, And I would say, though, that there are things like the United States Constitution, one of the most amazing political documents ever written, with the Bill of Rights, things like that the United States has that are pretty spectacular. Remember, slavery was something that was absolutely normalized in the world for thousands of years. And it was Britain and the United States that really stepped in and stopped that practice. So despite all the terrible, and you can talk about the antebellum South and what happened after that, and you would not be wrong. You would not be wrong, because with the good comes the bad. And all I know is, I haven't traveled everywhere, but I've spent time living abroad, sometimes years at a time, extended chunks. I produced a movie in Bulgaria, which was a delightful place, actually, former Soviet satellite state. Back in 2008, Dave Parker directed The Hills Run Red. We developed it at my company. We spent 3 years getting it made, got it to a motion picture studio in Warner Brothers, to Dark Castle Entertainment, run by Joel Silver, who I used to work for, and we made it there. We made it in Bulgaria with an international crew. Our director of photography was Israeli. We had our Steadicam operator was a native Bulgarian. We had people from all over Europe. We had a few Americans on the crew. I felt like it was the smartest film crew I'd ever been working with, just because of the languages that were being spoken. And I was grateful that I came from a place where I didn't have any family connections really to Hollywood, and was able to work my way up. And because of the work that I had done all the way back to when I started working in video stores when I was 13, led me to produce a movie for Warner Brothers in a foreign country. And that was, it was a long time coming. It was a very circuitous route to get there. But it was an amazing thing to be able to do. It was amazing to be working on Lord of the Rings in New Zealand, and then to work on Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, then to work on Superman Returns in Australia. I got to shoot a documentary back in 2018 in South Korea, another wild place. I got to see Samsung's first Betamax. It's in a museum there. And that was amazing, just to see that artifact of history. So I felt very fortunate to have grown up where I've grown up now. And, I think that it's easy in our social media drenched age to take a lot of that for granted. And I understand that. But that's not really what I wanted to talk about. I want to start by reading a letter. And I just got this letter, and this letter is titled, Sitting Still. And I got it 2 days ago. Dear Rob, I haven't written to you a letter in over a year. I started graduate school, and my program has kept me busy. I've continued to listen to Robservations when I find the time. However, I've been intrigued by your persistent advocacy for Michelangelo Antonioni's Ennui trilogy. I'd seen Blow Up as a freshman in college, and I remember liking it. Now in my mid-20s, I've proceeded much further on my quest to become an imagination connoisseur, but Blow Up remained the only Antonioni movie I had seen until last week. Due to your prodding, I finally watched La Ventura. Although it was definitely more difficult to parse than Blow Up, I resisted the urge to get up and do something else. I'm glad I did. La Ventura is a great movie, and not just in the way a mainstream American viewer is used to. We assume a great movie must be about a great story or great characters, preferably both. La Ventura is about a feeling. Most of us have gone on vacations with greater or lesser frequency throughout our lives. We know that they can be the indelible experiences sold to us in advertising. We also know they usually aren't that fulfilling. How many times, Rob, have you been on a vacation or even a day trip and been seized by the notion that you're wasting time? Not in a cavalier way or as a reaction to some workaholic tendency, but just a quiet sense that something about the trees, the ocean view, or a mountain shrouded in mist doesn't actually mean anything to you. It's a peculiar phenomenon, one of the ironies the modern age is constantly revealing to us. That's what La Ventura is about. La Ventura made me think about what movies can do, and made me reflect on my own life in a way that I hadn't before. I would not have had this experience if I had obeyed my impulse to stop watching during the first 20 minutes of the film. I worry that that impulse is what is corroding culture throughout the developed world. Reading is hard, but not that hard. What's difficult are those first 45 seconds after you open a book. Your entire being riots against the effort, you are making it expend. Your nerves scream, go click stuff on your phone. It's so much easier. For about 45 seconds, this reaction feels unendurable. Endure it. It's not really that difficult. All you have to do is sit still. Then the feeling vanishes and you realize, hey, I like to read. The same dynamic applies to film. Only we didn't used to think about it because movie watching was the easy thing to do. Compared to reading, yes it is. Compared to social media, not so much. Now that film is no longer the easiest pastime, watching movies, especially those that require more effort for more reward, takes a deliberate decision on your part. When listeners get angry at you for being pretentious, it's usually because they sense you think they're dumb. I don't think they're dumb, and I don't think you think so either. My guess is you think they're inconsiderate. That's actually very astute. As for me, I think the dividing line between more and less discerning viewers is patience. Movies aren't philosophy, although some are. They aren't hard. They're just some movies that take more time to understand than others. This doesn't mean you'll like everything that's been on the Sight and Sound list, but if you give movies more time, I bet you'll end up loving something you initially thought was too difficult for you. You'll also have a better understanding of why you don't like certain movies that have been labeled masterpieces. In my own case, I found the pacing of Stalker undercut the emotional resonance of its message. On the other hand, for the first 30 minutes of Tokyo Story, all I could see was thin characterization and overly formal home decoration. By the end of Tokyo Story, it was one of my favorite movies. Of course, there is a reason mainstream American movies predominate. They are easy to enjoy, and that shouldn't take away from how good they can be as well. I wouldn't trust somebody who loved Wild Strawberries but hated Logan. I would understand, but disagree with someone with the reverse opinion. There is such a thing as the pretentious cinephile, and anyone like me should be wary of becoming one. I do think, however, that more people who like the narrative arts should like them more than they do. If you like watching movies, take that part of yourself seriously. Become a good movie watcher. As with reading, the major hurdle is just not getting up to do something else. Unfortunately, in today's distracted age, that takes effort. I keep coming back to some lines the poet T.S. Eliot wrote in his 1930 poem, Ash Wednesday. They describe how I feel about our times and what we have to do about it. Because these wings are no longer wings to fly, but merely vans to beat the air which is now thoroughly small and dry, small and drier than the will. Teach us to care and not to care. Teach us to sit still. That comes to us from Isaac, and he wrote it on July 24th, 2025. Well, first of all, Isaac, I want to thank you for taking me up on watching La Ventura. I mean, here's the funny thing about movies like that, and why I always recommend the Ennui trilogy. Because they're movies about the internal. Like you said, they're movies about feeling. What do I feel about this? And they're not plot-driven. They're not even, 3-act structure in a lot of cases. You're going along like you are on an adventure. You're La Ventura, you're on this date, literally you're on a day trip, and like you said, well, what does it mean? Sometimes it doesn't mean anything. You're just on a day trip, you're kind of looking around and you wonder, why? What am I doing here? Why am I here? And I think that, like I've said a lot, you need to learn how to watch movies. I think the people that, obviously, the film Twitter, and there's a lot of pretentious cinephiles, but they become pretentious not because of the movies themselves. I think they become pretentious because that's what they want to project to other people. And I think you made a very good point. If you can't love Wild Strawberries and Logan, you're not a good movie watcher. And if you're only watching Logan and you don't even know what Wild Strawberries is, well, maybe you could take some time to find out. You know, that's the funny thing. I was always struck, and I've said this before, when I went to USC and I was in, what was it, Cinema 190? I had to take an Introduction to Cinema course. But the great thing about it was you got to see movies projected in the Norris Cinema, this big, beautiful cinema on the SC campus. And one of the things that was so great about that particular class is I got to see movies that I'd heard about my whole life, but I'd never actually sat down to watch. Like Singing in the Rain, like All About Eve, like Robert Altman's Nashville. And these were movies that literally on almost every occasion, I was blown away by these movies. There's a reason why the classic movies are classics. And I think nowadays, the problem is movie watchers, especially younger movie watchers, you have only been getting a certain kind of cinema for the last 30 years. There isn't even when you get foreign cinema, the foreign cinema that people are seeing has been much more westernized. Not all the time, but one of the countries, since it's been in the news, I've always wanted to go to Iran. I once saw a documentary about their car culture, how they loved American cars, their muscle cars, things like that. But there's a lot of great Iranian cinema that I identify with, or that I thought was quite beautiful. And if a culture can create beautiful cinema, I think that's a culture worth visiting. And I think that there's a lot of great cinema around the world, but they don't concentrate on things the way we here in America do. They think differently. I'm of the opinion that you can never go wrong visiting a culture, going someplace and immersing yourself in the culture. The longer you can be there, the better. And I'm not just talking about seeing the sights. I'm talking about, when you go to, if you stay in a hotel or a hostel, always ask somebody, as a local, where's a great place to go? Where's a cool bar? Where can I go to a cafe and sit down and maybe have some chit-chat with some locals? That's what I've loved doing the most. I've never been somebody who just wants to go see sights or go to a museum. I want to go talk to people, learn about them, find out what makes them tick. Tell me things I don't know about your culture. What's it like to live here on a daily basis? Bulgaria was great for that. And of course, when you work hard on a film, you play hard as well. People really like to party in Bulgaria, and they like to have fun. And it was a great place to go learn more about them. I've told this story before, and I know people talk to me, well, Rob, I've heard your stories. But, there was a beautiful girl that I met that worked at the hotel that I was staying at, and her boyfriend, we became friendly. And, they once said, I asked them, well, what do you guys want to do? And they talked to me about opening a cafe. And I thought, well, that's a great idea. You do a great job running the bar in the hotel. You should start your own cafe. And they told me at the time, that's not something people say. In Bulgaria of 2008, you couldn't just dream something up and go start a business. That was out of the realm of their experience. They told me that people would just say, oh, you can't do that. And that's what made me realize that one of the things that America has going for it is you can think up anything and go do it. Now, I'm not saying it's going to be easy and that it's not going to be fraught with peril and that you're not going to have a real hard time setting up whatever it is you want to set up. But the point is, in America, you can dream. You can afford to dream. You can get as much out of this country as you put in. And I think one of the things that people forget is they don't understand how much time and effort is put into something. I remember the girl that I was seeing at the time when we were doing The Hills Run Red. We'd been working on it. We had to make a trailer, a proof of concept trailer. And we were working on the project. We were about 6 months in. And I was able to get my friend Dave Scow, who co-wrote The Crow, who was a novelist. He coined the phrase splatterpunk in Fangoria magazine. I met him in 1989 because he wrote Leatherface, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. I was a lowly PA, but I befriended him. And I'd always admired him, and we kind of lived close together, and I stayed in touch with him. And when we went and did Chronicles of Narnia, he knew Peter Jackson, so I took him to New Zealand with me, and he was living in New Zealand and covering the Weta workshop and stuff. And, it was a natural thing when we got the assignment We had this script we were going to rewrite that I was able to get Dave Scow to rewrite it. This was in 2008. I met him, actually, it was earlier, 2007, 2006, 2007. But I had met him in 1989. And that friendship and the work relationship we had endured. But the point was, the seeds were planted when I was a lowly PA on a movie, the first movie I worked on out of film school. I do have a screen credit as Robert Burnett. And we became friends, but then we actually got to make a movie together in 2008, 19 years later. And, you know, that's what perseverance and friendship and continued work does. I had to put in that time, but Dave Parker was somebody I met in the early 90s. Same thing. We all were friends, and we got something made. We got something done. But it took 19 years. Now, some people would say, was it worth it? Was it worth it to make that movie? Because it was, you know, it was a direct-to-video film. It was a Dark Castle entertainment movie. It was the second. They were going to do 10 of those movies. They only made 2. And then we got to go to the Sitges Film Festival in Spain, which I loved. One of my favorite film festivals in the world. Got to go to the Seattle Film Festival. Dave Parker got to go to London with the movie. And so it was definitely worth it. And Scream Factory put it out on Blu-ray in 2020. We got to do new special features during the pandemic. So something that really had its roots back in 1989, I was working on it, and it got re-released in 2020. So something from 1989 all the way to 2020 was an entertainment-related thing based on people that I'd worked with and met in the business and carried throughout that time. Now, you have to put in that work. It didn't just represent the actual work that we did together. It was everything that happened in between, all of the fits and starts and stops and starts for projects that never got made or projects that only got half made. But the point was, none of us gave up. Scow was writing novels. He was writing articles for Fangoria. Dave Parker was doing editorial, making low-budget movies, doing whatever he could. I was doing DVD special feature stuff. I worked in makeup effects. I did all kinds of different things. But the fact is, it was nose to the grindstone, and we never gave up what we wanted to do, which was work in the entertainment business and make things. And, you know, yeah, you might want to make movies, but you have to make dozens of different things in between to keep going. That's America. That's one of the great things about this country. If you put in a lot, you will get a lot back, but that's not to say it's going to be easy. But the Western values allow you to do that, and there's a lot of places in the world that do not. Now, another thing about what we were doing is that we took time to learn our craft. Now, some people would say, well, you know, you haven't made a $300 million movie. Not a lot of people get to do that, comparatively speaking. Certainly, if you look demographically, that's a very small group of people. But we still stayed in the game. But what allowed us, we constantly were working. We were learning. We were becoming experts. 10,000 hours, pshaw. Try 1 million hours. You know, I mean, we did the work. We put in the time. And I feel that today, that idea, I mean, there's a lot of people that do put in the time, but that idea, everyone thinks they're an expert now. You know, and I was even talking to somebody that I really respect, a really smart guy, and we were talking about Israel, and I had suggested you should go. And I got pushback. Why would I want to go there? Well, you're speaking out about it and what a terrible place it is and everything, and I can assure you that's not the case. And this person said to me, I'm not going there. And I'm like, yeah, but you speak out about it like you know. And all you're doing is listening to a collective group of people tell you something about a place that you've never been to. So you've made a decision. Now, I understand talking to informed people is one thing. But I've learned you can never truly understand, call it one of my favorite words other than verisimilitude is gestalt. The gestalt of something. You can't understand it until you've experienced it. Like cocaine. No. Just kidding, kids. Or good ecstasy. Good MDMA. You have to experience to understand it. Really. I mean, there are things. Do I want to do heroin? No, I don't. Although I'm curious because, it's killed so many people, but I wonder what it's like. And I did see Liquid Sky and, seen a lot of movies. What's so great about it? I'm just kidding. I'm not going to do heroin. Don't worry. But the thing is, going someplace and actually experiencing something, I think is important. And, not everyone's opinions are the same. You would never know that being on the internet. But that's kind of what I wanted to get around and talk about today. And again, I thought that letter that Isaac wrote about sitting down and watching a movie that you didn't know what it was about, experiencing that film, and after 20 minutes wanting to turn it off but persevere. And suddenly, as John Campea likes to say, movies are experiential events. And when you're watching a movie that is actually, the plot is not so important, but the feelings of it are. And Americans, especially now, most film fans today, they're woefully limited in terms of they haven't seen much other than Western cinema, UK, America, English language cinema. Not a lot of French, not a lot of Italian, not a lot of Russian, not a lot of Asian cinema, which is really too bad. There's a lot of cinema and a lot of storytelling that I think people are missing out on, and it becomes frustrating when people are and now we're in a place where people are actively saying to me that they're not going to watch Superman. They're not going to watch James Gunn's Superman. I mean, if you told me that we'd reach a place in fandom where people would just actively say, I'm not going to watch that, I would have thought you're crazy. Why wouldn't you? As a fan of Superman, I made a crack today. I said that if James Gunn told me that in his Superman movie, he was going to combine Groot and Superman and have Superman turn into a Groot-like tree, there's a lot of people that would laugh their ass off at that. But you know what? I wouldn't. Why not? Look at this. Here is a Lois Lane comic where literally Superman is turning into a tree. Here's another Superman comic where Superman and Batman get turned into kids by Lex Luthor. Now, to me, this is just too... There are thousands of wacky Superman comics that have been published over the years, and I've probably read a small fraction of them. But I know enough to know there's a lot of wackiness happening in comic book movies, or in comic books. And as James Gunn said in the comments that he made before the screening of Superman yesterday, I assume it was on the Warner lot, he said that Guardians of the Galaxy 1 was his homage, or his tribute, his love letter to cinema. But he said that Superman is his love letter to comics. And I think that anybody who's read comics for any length of time can tell that when you see the trailer for the movies. But I find it odd, and I guess it comes from my first Superman was George Reeves in the 50s Adventures of Superman series. I got to see the Kirk Allan serial, which came out before that, later. But then, of course, you had the Super Friends cartoon, the hour-long with Wendy and Marvin. And then my entire life, there's been different iterations of Superman. Animated iterations, of course, the 4 Christopher Reeve movies, the Superboy TV show with 2 different Superboys. And I've been seeing different iterations of Superman during that entire time I've been reading Superman comics. And there's all different kinds of Superman comics. And so now I'm here, and the idea that people in 2025, because they only liked one iteration of Superman, Zack Snyder's iteration, that they're not going to go, oh, this other Superman is trash. I'm like, how? Anybody who has any deep knowledge of Superman as a character in the many different mediums that he's existed in, you're only mad at one director? Does that mean that you only will ever watch Zack Snyder's Superman? Have you watched The Adventures of Superman from the 50s? Clearly not. But it's weird to me that we now live in a world where people will actively say, no, I'm not going to watch that. Who are you? What are you doing? Is somebody going to know that you haven't done that? Like, who are you sticking up for? The only person that you're hurting is yourself, or helping. I don't know if you're helping anybody by not watching something. Why would you want to remain ignorant of something, especially if you like the character? People ask me, well, Rob, if you don't like Star Trek, why do you watch it still? Well, I've loved Star Trek as a franchise. It's literally existed my entire life. And for more of my life than not, Star Trek has been something I've loved. It is a storytelling medium that has inspired me to do a lot of the things that I've done in my life. And I've got to work on Star Trek projects professionally and as a fan. And I'm part of a very, 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 very small group of people that actually made a movie about my Star Trek obsession that I just happened to go get William Shatner to be in. Again, isn't Western civilization, isn't America a great country? Because I could go get my favorite Canadian to be in a movie with another one of my favorite Canadians, Eric McCormack, and they both became Emmy winners. I got to write the script for them along with Mark Allman, and I got to direct them, which is another reason that I look back on my life and think, heck, I've done a lot of fun things. But I put in the work. I put in the time, and there's been a lot of dark fucking times when, you want to give up. But I've got a couple of articles I want to read. And one of them kind of harks back to the fact that, look, we now live in a world where everybody thinks they're an expert, no matter what. And if you want to get on a platform, you want to turn on a camera, you can talk whatever you want about whatever, anything you want to talk about, you can. And I found this article. Both of these articles are on Quillette, and the link is in the description. Now, here's the thing. I know some people are going to say, just yesterday, I put up a funny picture of a Hot Toys shipper box. And it wasn't my Hot Toys shipper box, but somebody had wrote it like the insinuation was a woman, like a wife had found this box, had found this on the doorstep and wrote, "Quit buying shit before I divorce you." And I thought it was pretty funny, and I put it up on my Instagram page, and somebody came and started attacking me on a funny post on my Instagram page saying that I'm not a progressive, that I lie about my the idea that every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear and all you have to do is listen, that was some kind of a lie. And people shouldn't listen to me because I pal around with right-wing friends. And to me, that comment, and I went back and I said, listen, if that's what you believe, you are welcome to come on this show. You can speak your piece. I'll listen and I'll respond. If you think that I'm lying to you, or that you have a problem with me, or that I'm not who I say I am, come on the show. I mean, the whole point, wasn't I the person that said that authenticity was the currency of the 21st century? Of course, now everyone's using that, but I do think that I was one of the first. I didn't hear it from anybody else, but it was something I truly believe. But I got called out on a comedic post on Instagram from somebody, and of course, when I wrote them back, they're like, "Oh, no, I'll take the post down." I'm like, I don't take, when people talk shit about me, I don't take those posts down. I leave them up. Sometimes I'll take my posts down, and if there's a comment underneath, they go away. But for the most part, I leave those kinds of things up. I'm not afraid of criticism. And I read letters from random people on this show. And so anyway, I want to read this article. I found this article. I don't know if you all know who Douglas Murray is. A lot of people do. And you saw this Joe Rogan show that he was on with a comedian. I want to read an article about this because I thought this was a great piece. And this was published on April 24th, 2025. And it was on Quillette, and the title is, obviously you can see it, "Against the Tyranny of Opinionated Ignorance." And it's written by Yuki Zeman. The recent disagreement on the Joe Rogan Experience between journalist Douglas Murray on one hand and Rogan and comedian Dave Smith. By the way, comedian Dave Smith has now made it a cottage industry, going on and talking about Israel and Iran. He's a comedian. Where his credentials come discussing these matters, I don't know. But the recent disagreement on the Joe Rogan Experience between journalist Douglas Murray on one hand and Rogan and comedian Dave Smith on the other has exposed a problem with the populist media ecosystem. the casual normalization and celebration of opinions untethered to knowledge. In what follows, I offer 8 brief reflections on this trend and its hazards. Ortega y Gasset and the satisfied amateur who regards his ignorance not as a defect to be corrected, but as a virtue to be celebrated. In the world of populist podcasting, this archetype is frequently given center stage in the name of heterodoxy. When Dave Smith declares his right to discuss Israeli-Palestinian history without deeply studying it, or when Joe Rogan defends such expressions as authentic and valuable purely for being unfiltered, they manifest the worst tendencies of the señorito. Rogan's open-door policy is not problematic in itself, but the framing of every viewpoint as equally valid, regardless of depth or rigor, aligns chillingly with Ortega's vision of an anti-intellectual cultural slide. The characteristic of the hour, Ortega warned, is that the mediocre soul, recognizing itself as mediocre, has the audacity to assert the rights of the mediocre. He foresaw our dilemma, when the only qualification for being heard is the will to speak. Part 2. Douglas Murray, misunderstood defender of discernment. Douglas Murray's position is easily caricatured by populists as elitist in our everything goes cultural moment. But his intervention on Rogan's podcast was not a demand for censorship. It was a call for standards. Murray understands the need to distinguish between freedom of speech and the mere pretense of knowledge and understanding. His frustration was not directed at Smith personally, but at a broader phenomenon, the rise of what Atlantic contributor and former international relations specialist Tom Nichols has called the death of expertise in his book of the same name. Murray's critics mistake rigor for suppression, but to argue that not everyone is qualified to speak on nuclear war or genocide is not to deny freedom. It's to protect meaning. Murray is not defending his own position. He wants to prevent the intellectual commons from being flooded by unchecked performative ignorance. He was protesting a mode of discourse that rewards spectacle over substance. His critique should be understood as a defense of a fragile ecosystem, where ideas must compete not only for attention, but for coherence and truth. Camus. Part 3. Camus, the rebel and the moral weight of speech. Populist podcasters and their guests like to present themselves as vital voices of rebellious dissent in a media environment of stultifying and frequently mistaken consensus. But Albert Camus taught us that rebellion must be bound by ethics. In The Rebel, Camus distinguished between rebellion as a noble affirmation of justice and revolt as mere destruction. Similarly, when we provide someone with a platform to speak with authority about topics they do not fully understand, regardless of context or consequence, we risk tipping from noble dissent into a form of discursive anarchy. Speech, in this context, is an ethical act. In a world where misinformation fuels division, bad faith arguments on massive platforms become acts of sabotage. Dave Smith's uninformed claims about Jewish identity and geopolitics do not constitute an anti-establishment rebellion. They just constitute noise. Douglas Murray's stance channels Camus' ethic of measured resistance. It is not a reactionary suppression of free voices. It is a reaffirmation of the idea that speech must bear the moral weight of its consequences. AKA, you don't yell fucking fire in a crowded theater. Wittgenstein, this is part 4. Wittgenstein, Language, Limits, and Intellectual Honesty. Ludwig Wittgenstein's philosophy offers a quiet but firm critique of the kind of discourse that now proliferates online. And I can never get this, but Tractatus Logico Philosophicus He concludes, "Whereof one cannot speak, therefore one must be silent." This is not a call for censorship either. It is a call for intellectual humility, a principle now under siege. Rogan's show often mistakes verbal freedom for conceptual clarity, but Wittgenstein would have urged caution. When language is unmoored from understanding, it ceases to communicate and becomes theater. The words may remain familiar, but the grammar of truth is lost. By speaking without adequate preparation on matters of life and death, war, genocide, ideology, guests like Dave Smith cheapen the value of discourse. Wittgenstein would have called this a misuse of language and a betrayal of its seriousness. Zeilberberg, The Ethics of Not Knowing. Jacques Zeilberberg argued that a speaker acquires moral weight when their words reach an audience. Public speech, particularly on massive platforms, creates ripples that extend beyond the moment. Ignorant speech to a large audience is not just an intellectual failure, it is an ethical failure as well. Zeilberberg was not just troubled by the ease with which falsehoods spread. He wanted to show that their transmission becomes socially sanctified through repetition and popularity. In this framework, Joe Rogan's defense of just asking questions is suspect. It is a rhetorical device cloaking epistemic negligence in the garb of curiosity. Murray's insistence on accountability is restorative. It demands that public intellectuals be stewards of understanding, not amplifiers of confusion. Part 6. The seduction of the uninformed opinion. The allure of uninformed opinion lies in its convenience. It demands no reading, no translation, no challenge to one's prior assumptions. It is democratic in the most corrosive way. It replaces competence with confidence and inquiry with assertion. In the podcasting world, this dynamic is dangerous. Influence is not proportional to insight. Popularity is not merit. A well-framed falsehood reaches more ears than a nuanced truth. Murray's position is unpopular precisely because it asks us to slow down, to read, to reflect, to think, to acknowledge what we do not know. In an attention economy, virtues like these are seen as liabilities, and yet they are the very foundations of a thinking society. Part 7. Toward a culture of discernment. To recover a meaningful public sphere, we must not only protect speech, we must also be able to judge it. Discernment does not require suppression. It requires listening with care, with criteria, and with context. The elevation of every opinion to equal stature is not egalitarian. It's nihilistic. Douglas Murray's protest is a sign of intellectual health. It is a boundary marker, a reminder that not all speech is equal, and that judgment is not exclusionary, but essential. Part 8. The courage to speak well or not at all. So let this be the call, not for silence, but for courage. The courage to say, I do not know. The courage to wait before speaking. The courage to study before opining. And above all, the courage to stand, as Douglas Murray has done, against the flattening of discourse and the tyranny of opinionated ignorance. In honoring Ortega, Camus, Wittgenstein, and Zeilberberg, we do not retreat from free speech. We advance it. But we advance it into maturity, into responsibility, into the discipline without which thought becomes spectacle and truth becomes fashion. Let us not confuse the freedom to speak with the freedom to mislead. Let us defend not only the right to speak, but the duty to mean something when we do. I love that. And that's by Yuki Zeman. And Yuki Zeman is a retired professor of cultural anthropology. She lives in Tokyo and writes, "When silence won't suffice." Again, that article was on Quillette. You can find it in the description below. Now, let's apply that to fandom. Everybody, I mean, my God, everybody's always talking about their opinions on everything. But, you know, now we're listening to people tell us why they aren't going to watch something. Look, I've always believed that you should see something before you critique it. You know, and if you're going to opine on it, you really should see it first. You know, and before you start talking about it, think about it. Like for me, people always say, "Well, Rob, you're no politician. Why don't you just stick to what you know? Talk about Star Trek and the movie business or whatever." Well, I would say I've been intellectually curious about a lot of things. You know, I've read a lot of things. I would not consider myself a historian. I know probably a little bit more about Israeli history than a lot of people because I learned it in religion school growing up. And I've been to Israel. So I think Israel is a wonderful place that has been embattled since its conception in 1948, or its inception in 1948. But I don't want to get into that. I meant for this to be more about fandom, you know, and more about the discourse we have. And the thing about this channel is the people that keep coming back to this channel seem to me people that are interested in cogent discourse and how stories are. First of all, are stories good or bad? Should we consume them? And if we like them and they're good stories, what do they mean and how do they give our lives context? That's how I've always thought. All of this, why am I saying, my favorite saying, you know, that the things that come out of my mouth, my favorite saying that I came up with is that the best fiction is the most truthful. And I really believe that. And I think that great fiction can illuminate our lives. We can learn a lot from great fiction. Like Isaac's letter about La Ventura showed us. So anyway, I think that, you know, take that what you... look, for me, that's what I think about. That article, those are the kinds of things that run through my head during the day. And I read that article and I wanted to share it because I think it's true. I think we owe it to ourselves, living here in the West, to bring a little bit more intellectual rigor or even a little bit more thought to all the things that we say and the things that we believe. Jeff Messerman became a Imagination Connoisseur, joined the channel. D's Webos saw F1 today and loved it. I was supposed to see it tonight at 6:30. I had to move my ticket. I'm going to see it tomorrow at 3 o'clock. I'm glad you loved it. A lot of people liked it. Nerd Cookies loved it too. Vrock408 says, I thought of you when I heard that you were bombing in Israel from the U.S. I was wondering your thoughts. Yeah, look, I am a huge fan of Israel. I think it's a very cosmopolitan place. I think, you know, it's the only democracy in the Middle East. And do I think everything they do is proper? No, but I think it's a great country. I think it shines as a beacon of light and thought. And it is a place. I mean, there's a place where people can yell and scream at each other all the time, and that's their political system. And it's encouraged. But anyway, I don't want to get into that totally. Thomas Logan says, Bobby, this Robservations episode should have been called 007 is Back, Baby, and his name is Dennis Castro. Denis Villeneuve. The Social Network 2, Zuck Harder. Could be. I'm really curious to see how that's going to turn out. Look, Denis Villeneuve is an incredible director. I can't wait to see what he's going to do with James Bond. I remain cautiously hopeful that we'll get a great movie, but it still needs a great script and you still need a great Bond. And I worry if Denis Villeneuve can bring Bond, you know, a great Bond movie has a lot going on in it. And tonally, you know, it can take you got quippy one-liners, you've got great action. It'll be interesting to see how he approaches, because he's a very serious filmmaker. and I'll be curious to see where he takes us. But I am looking forward to Social Network 2, Zuck Harder. We were talking about that today. Parknarks says, "You rock, Rob. Are you familiar with the author Dara Horn? I am not. I think you'd like her stuff. Also, thoughts on Max Fleischer's Superman cartoons. I love Max Fleischer's Superman cartoons. I really hope they're remastered on Blu-ray because they don't look so great. But, again, I've been watching Max Fleischer's Superman cartoons my whole life. And I think there's a little bit of Max Fleischer's Superman cartoons in what we're going to see in James Gunn's Superman. Yeah. The Josh21 says, Rob, I play as ROB in Super Smash Ultimate. Well, I hope you play well and you deliver the smackdown in Super Smash Ultimate. But that's very flattering. Thomas Bennett says, hey, Rob, do you know of a paperback English dictionary under 1,000 pages? AI and Google have failed me. I thought you might be able to help. That's a good question. I don't. I can't tell you the last time I bought a paperback dictionary. I used to have one hanging around all the time, but I haven't had one in a long time. Darth Plato says that words are the money of fools. Thomas Hobbes said that. Bert says, R&B, have you been? And then you have never been. I don't recognize that quote. Have you been? Have you never been? You have never been. But yeah, look, it harks back to, I think people should go whenever you get a chance. Mr. Z becomes an imagination connoisseur. Well, thank you, Mr. Z. And then you upgraded your membership to a friend of the channel. Thank you very much for that. Parknarks says Dave Smith is one of the most annoying commentators on the internet. He's also very, very disrespectful to the people that he's on with. His constant making faces and talking over people. Yeah, he's kind of a clown. I'm not really a fan of his. I keep looking for his comedy. I want to go watch his comedy. Maybe I'll like his comedy. I don't know. Oscar Herrera sent a Burnettwork membership out there as a gift. Well, thanks for doing that, Oscar. That's very nice of you. Very much appreciate that. Thank you very much. I have another article I'm going to read, too, about the West, about Western civilization. Darth Plato says, if nobody hates Superman like Superman fans, then how can they be called Superman fans? Darth Plato is absolutely correct. Vrock, I wanted to also say, look, when I saw when Iran started lobbing ballistic missiles into Israeli cities, it made me really, really sad. Just like, look, what happened in Gaza is very sad too. I mean, don't think that doesn't make me sad, but it's war. War is hell. That's why it's something, as Kirk would say, something to be avoided. And it's the whole situation is it's not good. We've got to end it all. I also do think, though, and a lot of people don't like it when I say this, if Israel was left alone, Israel can be a shining beacon in the Middle East because, as I said, it's cosmopolitan. There are people of all shapes, sizes, colors, creeds there. It's got a very vibrant culture, and it's not like there's a lot of Arab culture there. There's Persian history there. There's all kinds of history. There's people from all over the world that are in Israel, and it's a fantastic place. When it's not, people want to kill all the Jews and they want to destroy Israel, and that's just an existential threat that they exist. And the opposite is not true. I don't care what anyone says. Israel is not looking to eliminate anybody from this planet. They just simply aren't. And if you see how big Israel is, it's not. It's a very tiny, tiny place. But I know a lot of people disagree with me. Alex Yah says, from Israel over here, thanks for everything you do, Rob. Also, Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers, between sirens and missile attacks on us, your voice was so calming. Well, Alex, on one hand, I thank you for that, but on the other hand, I wish that wasn't the case. When I was in Israel, I met a guy named Haggai, And I remember, I don't know, like 10 years ago, he got in touch with me, and he was on the front lines. I don't know if it was with Lebanon fighting against Hezbollah, but I mean, I've had Israeli friends now for 20 years since I was there. I was there 20 years ago, and they've been on the front lines fighting. And it's insane to me. Also because, I'd love to live in Tel Aviv. I'd love to have a place. I love Tel Aviv. Oh my God, what a great city. Thomas Logan says, Rajin Page, I'm mispronouncing that, should be given a license to bond. You know what? They're going to hold on to that tight, but that's not bad. That's not bad. But Alex, I thank you for that. I appreciate that. Yeah, I can't imagine having ballistic missiles lobbed into your neighborhoods. But I've got another article that I want to read, and this is a long one. And again, I found these two articles the other day, and I wanted to do this show. But I've always been curious, especially since the advent of social media, this people that are living within Western civilization, a lot of them have been sort of, I think, ideologically captured by academia that has also been ideologically captured by bad actors that are intentionally trying to dismantle Western civilization from within, which to me is sort of interesting because the one thing that Western civilization has going for it is the very thing that leaves it vulnerable to being ideologically captured, in that we have free speech. And it's wild to me that there are people that want to get rid of free speech. And yet, crazy. But here's another article that I really like. This is a long one. It'll probably take me a while to read this. Mr. Z, first of all, says, what are your thoughts on Denis Villeneuve's Bond, RE Gen Z, Gen Alpha sensibilities? Also born and raised in America, but I am an Israeli citizen as well. I second your notion that they were left alone, they would be so chill. Israel, look, if they just left Israel alone, not only would it be so chill, it would be, first of all, you've got the very basis of Judeo-Christian culture, the Abrahamic religions. It's so interesting. There's so much interesting history there. And I'll tell you, the Israelis are fucking fun. I mean, to go there is to have a very good time. And, they also have a huge contingent of fans, science fiction, fantasy, horror, genre fans. I was invited there for the Icons Festival with filmmaker Roger Nygard, who made his documentary Trekkies, and I had made my fictional film Free Enterprise. And we went and showed our films and spoke. Like the mayor of Tel Aviv came out, audiences were great, and I'll tell you something, the audiences were very inquisitive about the business of things. Like, people were asking me, there's a lot of things in Israel that you couldn't necessarily get on physical media yet, or things weren't playing there, and people were like, they're very worried what I would think about them, that they were pirating things, or they were getting stuff that they shouldn't have had, or that hadn't been legally released. A lot of people said that to me. And I did a radio talk show when I was there, and I was surprised everybody spoke English and good English. But I said, look, if you're a marketplace, if you're a country that things aren't being released in your country, it's not your fault that you're going to acquire them and see them. I mean, at least you're aware of it, and it seems to me all of you want to be able to pay for something legally. You don't just want to download. At least at that point, 20 years ago, people still valued files and things like that. Like, I shouldn't be downloading these for free. I should be paying somebody. Nowadays, I don't know if that still holds, but it was really interesting to have those conversations. Yeah, I mean, I loved it. I would love to go back. I was thinking I was going to go back. I would go back. I just, kind of mortgage poor and all that, but I would go back even now. Like, I'd go back right now. And it'd be interesting to do some kind of a documentary or interview people on the street. But here is this article. It's a really long article. Again, it was in Quillette, but I just found it fascinating because it speaks to a lot of the discourse that I hear online. And here's the article. It's by Martin Baudry. The Enlightenment's Gravediggers, When Westerners Hate the West. And this is obviously this is a historical article. It starts with a few quotes. There is nothing that exists so great or marvelous that over time mankind does not admire it less and less. Lucretius said that. What have the Romans ever done for us? Monty Python. It was as though he'd been struck by a bolt of lightning. Jean-Jacques Rousseau would later recall in his autobiographical Confessions. The aspiring young philosopher, I don't know how you'd say that, from Geneva had been casually leafing through a copy of the literary magazine Mercure de France while taking a brisk walk from Paris to Vincennes, when he stumbled upon an intriguing announcement. The distinguished Académie de Dijon was offering a prize for the best essay to answer the following question. Has the reestablishment of the sciences and arts contributed to the purification of morals? This famous walk took place in 1749, at the height of the Republic of Letters, a vibrant community of intellectuals from across Europe who exchanged correspondence, wrote for periodicals, and mingled in salons to discuss radical new ideas. A few decades earlier, Mercure de France had played a leading role in the famous, again, Querelle des Anciens et des Modernes, the great debate about whether the modern age had surpassed the achievements of antiquity. By the end of the 17th century, the debate had been all but settled in favor of the moderns, thanks to the explosive advances of the sciences. But now the Académie de Dijon was posing a different and equally pressing question. Has all this undeniable scientific progress also led to moral improvement? If our young philosopher had been astride a horse, he would almost certainly have tumbled off, much like St. Paul during his conversation on the road to his conversion on the road to Damascus. Rousseau recounts, "Within an instant of reading this, I saw another universe and became another man. In a feverish vision, he at once apprehended the innocence of humanity in its original state, and the depravity of our civilization. By the time he arrived at Vincennes, he was teetering on the brink of delirium. His response to the prize question, composed during sleepless nights and dictated from his bed to his secretary each morning, was a sweeping indictment of civilization. Far from elevating and refining the human spirit, he argued, the advances in sciences and arts had corrupted and degraded it. Rousseau depicted a stark contrast between the blissful ignorance of primitive peoples and the vain sophistication and decadence of so-called civilized ones. Wherever the sciences flourished, he argued, virtue withered. Throughout history, civilizations inevitably crumbled under the weight of their own pointless knowledge and arrogant refinements, only to be overpowered by robust, untamed barbarians." Rousseau's first discourse is one of the earliest instances of something that would come to accompany modernity whenever it gained a foothold. Biting the hand that feeds you because you know it won't punch you in the face. Just consider what's going on here. An erudite and cultured philosopher pens a diatribe against the acquisition of knowledge to be read by the intellectual elite of France and Europe. In eloquent prose that displays his knowledge of both ancient and modern history, Rousseau denounces refinement and scholarly pursuits. And yet, Rousseau himself made significant contributions to Diderot and, I can't pronounce this, D'Alembert famed encyclopedia, the crown jewel of 18th century French Enlightenment. As a gifted composer and musicologist, Rousseau wrote the bulk of the articles on music. Diderot was still a close friend of Rousseau's at this time, though they would later have a bitter falling out, and he not only proofread Rousseau's essay, but encouraged him to enter it for the competition. Was Diderot swayed by his Genevan friend's indictment of civilization? Not at all, but he relished the provocation. Here was a leading encyclopedist taking down the whole encyclopedia project. Diderot's open-mindedness encapsulates the Enlightenment in a nutshell. A profound appreciation for fearless self-criticism and for the relentless clash of ideas, even to the extent of inviting one's own adversaries to give one a thorough intellectual thrashing. Rousseau predicted that his essay would be met with a universal outcry against him, and that only a handful of enlightened or perhaps unenlightened souls would truly grasp the force of his arguments. But I have taken my stand, and I shall be at no pains to please either intellectuals or men of the world, he declared. The irony is that he learned the Academy awarded him the first prize. To be sure, freedom of expression was still heavily restricted during Rousseau's lifetime. Several Enlightenment thinkers ended up in prison for their subversive opinions or had to escape to more tolerant places like Switzerland or the Netherlands. The destination of Rousseau's famous walk was, of course, of all places, the Vincennes prison, where his friend Diderot was behind bars for his atheist views. Yet the Enlightenment thinkers had carved out a little sanctuary of free thought for themselves, a space where they had nothing to fear, since they were amongst friends. Rousseau knew that Diderot and D'Alembert would not send a mob after him because he had besmirched the encyclopedia, so what could be safer than biting that particular hand? Better still, it enabled Rousseau to portray himself as a courageous truth seeker, challenging prevailing dogmas. The French philosopher Pascal Bruckner once quipped that nothing is more Western than hatred of the West. As early as 1945, George Orwell noted that there is a minority of intellectual pacifists whose real, though unacknowledged motive appears to be hatred of Western democracy and admiration for totalitarianism. After the Second World War, Western academic institutions spawned one school after another to denounce or undermine Western civilization. Postmodernists like Michel Foucault and Jacques Derrida attacked the logocentrism of Western rationality and attempted to deconstruct the narrative of scientific and moral progress. Followers of the Frankfurt School of Critical Theory wrote devastating critiques of the European Enlightenment. Its delusional project to quantify, rationalize, and dominate the world, they claimed, had paved the way for National Socialism and the Holocaust. Social constructivists exposed modern science as just one mythological narrative among many. Science, they argued, did not so much reveal reality as construct its own reality, and an oppressive one at that. Post-colonial thinkers denounced Western civilization for its colonialism and cultural imperialism. Environmentalists argued that Western modernity is ravaging nature and upsetting the delicate balance of our planetary climate. The Industrial Revolution that originated in Western Europe, they claim, may turn out to have been humanity's most fateful blunder. Every evil in the world, racism, slavery, colonialism, greed, imperialism, exploitation, sexism, environmental destruction, patriarchy, homophobia, has been laid at the door of Western civilization, often by intellectuals who enjoy all the benefits of living in the West. Every evil in the world, that's what he just said. As Douglas Murray documents in The War on the West, all over the Western world, left-wing activists are knocking Western heroes like Winston Churchill and Abraham Lincoln off their pedestals, often literally. Statues have been smeared with paint, monuments have been demolished, museums and curricula have been decolonized. The campus protests against Israel are less about anti-Semitism than about a hatred of Western civilization. For the protesters, Israel represents the West's last settler colonial project. Columbia University's Students for Justice in Palestine proudly proclaimed, "We are Westerners fighting for the total eradication of Western civilization." This echoes something Stokely Carmichael said in the 1960s. When you talk of black power, you talk of building a movement that will smash everything Western civilization had created. Although over the past decades, leftists have been more creative in inventing ever more novel ways of denouncing Western civilization, the efforts of the right should not be discounted either. In fact, radical environmentalism originated on the right. A century ago, those who bewailed the befoulment of nature by factory smoke, coal mines, and railroads, and believed industrialization was humanity's biggest mistake, were mostly blue-blooded toffs who wanted to use nature for their own recreation and hunting game. Environmentalism only crossed the political aisle in and around 1970. Moreover, conservative intellectuals have long lamented that modern society is undermining traditional family values, ripping communities apart, and eroding religious faith, and they often laud the values of pre-modern culture over those of our own society. There is also a rich tradition of right-wing thinkers in the West cozying up to foreign dictators, theocrats, and military strongmen who are sworn enemies of Western civilization and its liberal values. This august tradition of right-wing fellow traveling has recently been revived by Donald Trump, who openly expresses admiration for totalitarian dictators like Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and Kim Jong-un, and who, when questioned about Putin's murderous regime, gave an answer that any student of Noam Chomsky could have rattled off. "You think our country's so innocent? Both the far left and the far right now believe that Russia was provoked into invading Ukraine by the aggressive expansion of NATO." So, where does all this Western self-loathing come from? Is there something about Western modernity that sows the seeds of its own discontent? Is it curious that some of these intellectual currents, especially on the left, sprang from the Enlightenment itself, with its long tradition of merciless self-criticism? In this sense, the school of thought resembles an intellectual autoimmune disorder, in which the immune system starts to attack the body's own cells. Some thinkers, including the aforementioned Pascal Bruckner, argue that Western self-abasement is rooted in the Christian religion. According to Christianity's doctrine of original sin, we are all irredeemably tainted by evil and pride, believing that you are better than other people, and it's the worst of the 7 cardinal sins. Christian believers are constantly told that they should express remorse at their sinfulness and depravity. Moreover, Jesus stood up for the weak and the outcasts and the downtrodden. Could this be the psychological origin of the Western intellectuals' strange habit of pretending that their civilization is the root of all evil? Personally, I think the Western penchant for vilifying our own civilization has a more straightforward explanation. Only a free and affluent civilization like ours permits people to vilify it. Where else can you take your own political leaders to task in public, even insult and abuse them, without fear of repercussions? You shouldn't try it in Russia or China, just as you shouldn't have tried it in Europe before the rights revolution and the liberal constitutions of the 19th and 20th centuries. Similarly, where are you free to wage a full frontal attack on the economic and political institutions under which you live? Where can you make a fuss about problems both real and imaginary? Only in a liberal democracy. But why would you want to bite the hand that feeds you in this way? Such critics have a variety of motives, but perhaps for many the main appeal is that in doing so, they feel they're striking a heroic posture. In a Western democracy, you can pat yourself on the back for courageously speaking truth to power. You can even complain about being silenced and censored, while the very fact that you're able to voice these complaints out loud proves them hollow. It's the intellectual equivalent of a soccer player theatrically flopping down onto the field to feign injury. In economic terms, this is a supply-side explanation. Kvetching and griping are always in demand. In Monty Python's Life of Brian, the leader of the Popular Front of Judea, asks indignantly, "What have the Romans ever done for us?" But of course, he does so in a secret meeting without any Romans within earshot. Our free society, like the Roman one, offers almost unlimited opportunities to openly voice such complaints with impunity. What has the Enlightenment ever done for us? Nowhere else in the world, and at no other previous time in history, have people ever had so much freedom to bite the hand that feeds them without being punched in the face for it. This leads to a paradox that was probably first described by American diplomat Daniel Patrick Moynihan. The amount of violations of human rights in a country is always an inverse function of the amount of complaints about human rights violations heard from there. The greater the number of complaints being aired, the better protected are the human rights in that country. If you find yourself in a society where everyone seems satisfied with the current institutions and nobody openly complains about corruption or expression, you should get the hell out of there as quickly as possible. Chances are that you're living in a totalitarian dystopia. If, on the other hand, people around you are constantly griping that their freedoms are being trampled and their leaders are corrupt and declaring that the whole political system should be smashed to the ground, you should heave a sigh of relief. You've found a free society. Moynihan's law highlights a contrast between open and closed societies, but it can also apply to the same society at different points in its history. Over time, as societies become freer, human rights organizations gain more access to information and enjoy more freedom to do their work, which allows them to uncover more abuses. This can give rise to the illusion that things are getting worse, when the exact opposite is true. In a country that guarantees freedom of the press and has mechanisms to make government information public, such as a Freedom of Information Act, any corruption that does exist is more likely to be brought to light. The political scientist Catherine Sikink calls this the information paradox. As ex-Muslim Ibn Warwick writes, "The openness of Western societies means that our ills and squalor are exposed publicly, while the worst in Islamic societies is hidden from infidels." Warwick, not coincidentally, published his own book, Why I Am Not a Muslim, with a Western publisher, and even in the West, he needs the cover of a pseudonym to protect him from the wrath of his own co-religionists. Free societies often grant a platform to their own worst enemies. In 2013, while Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad was suffocating his own people with poison gas and President Obama was considering launching a military intervention to stop him, Assad's patron, Vladimir Putin, was given a column in the op-ed pages of the New York Times, in which he lectured the West about the rules of international law. Didn't Western leaders understand, cautioned Putin, that violating Syria's territorial integrity without a mandate from the UN Security Council, where Russia has veto power, would amount to a blatant act of aggression in violation of the UN Charter upholding the peaceful international order? 6 months later, Putin's army brutally annexed Crimea in Ukraine in preparation for a full-scale invasion of that sovereign democratic country. I wonder if Putin would be willing to give Western leaders a column in Izvesta, controlled by the Kremlin, to express their concerns about this. Attitudes towards Israel provide a striking illustration of Moynihan's law and the information paradox. As in other Western countries, Israeli newspapers, NGOs, and ordinary citizens are free to criticize, insult, and even vilify their leaders, and even take legal action against their executive government. Israeli society has a long and admirable tradition of taking the government to task. Among the pro-Palestinian left, this openness is consistently touted as proof that the country is uniquely rotten. An endless series of articles in the Western media have taken the following angle. Even Israelis admit that their country is an apartheid state and is committing genocide in Gaza. These critics fail to understand that this freedom to criticize the government is precisely what sets the country apart from its neighbors. Few Palestinians and few Arabs anywhere in the Middle East feel safe enough to express harsh criticism of their own leaders. Openly dissident Palestinians exist, but almost all of them live in Western cities and/or publish in Western newspapers. The fact that the more self-critical voices reach us from Israel than from Gaza or Lebanon is not a sign that things are worse over there, but precisely the opposite. Israeli society still has the ability to engage in self-criticism and course-correct when necessary. Biting the hand that won't punch you has long been a favorite pastime of Western intellectuals. In 1942, Austrian economist Joseph Schumpeter noted that for the intellectual elite, condemnation and rejection of capitalism is almost a requirement of the etiquette of discussion. Whatever his political preference, every writer or speaker has to conform to this code and to emphasize the critical attitude, his freedom from complacency, his belief in the inadequacies of capitalist achievement, his aversion to capitalist, and his sympathy with anti-capitalist interests. Nothing equivalent existed in communist countries. Openly expressing your aversion to Marxism from behind the Iron Curtain would have meant social opprobrium at best, but more likely the Gulag. Communist sympathizers in the West, however, were free to vilify their own societies, while glorifying the totalitarian alternative they never had to suffer under. Most were savvy enough to remain hypocrites. They returned from brief visits to Stalin's Russia or Mao's China, raving about the glorious future they supposedly witnessed there, but only the truly deluded actually packed their bags for Moscow or Beijing. Anti-Western critics often like to pretend that their bravery will be met with universal outcry against them. But with few exceptions, such as in the McCarthy era, these crusaders are given free rein. In fact, they are often handsomely rewarded for their voracious hand-biting, at least within their own social circles, like colleges. In a wonderfully scathing letter of 1935, British socialist and feminist Sylvia Pankhurst takes George Bernard Shaw to task for such ungrateful posturing. Shaw had enthusiastically supported Benito Mussolini's corporate state in Italy, even though he thought it rested on flimsy premises, because he hoped it would hasten the downfall of capitalism at home. Meanwhile, Shaw dismissed freedom in his own country as a putrefying corpse. Pankhurst tells him, "At least in the non-fascist countries, most of us are able to do propaganda for our own convictions, as you and I do. If you lived in Italy, you would not be permitted to do any propaganda except on behalf of the ruling clique. You would not be permitted to say that Italy's corporate state is a scrap of paper and an explosion of gas. There are men and women in the dungeons and on the penal islands of Italy for saying just that very thing, and I warrant if you say it long enough, you will not be permitted to go to Italy for your holidays, nor will your plays any longer be permitted there. Dare to write about it in the Times, and this will be the result." Even after the Cold War ended and most of the world's communist regimes collapsed, biting the nourishing hand of industrial modernity remained a favorite pastime of leftist intellectuals. Postmodernists and critical theorists launched countless attacks on Western civilization while ensconced in cushy positions at Western universities, and Western presses published their books. A conference in the humanities can sometimes feel like a Mexican birthday party, in which blindfolded children take turns to whack a piñata until it bursts and send candy flying everywhere, with Western modernity being their piñata. This faux radical posture has become a hackneyed tradition of its own. As Tom Wolfe put it half a century ago, radical chic, after all, is only radical in style. In its heart, it is part of society and its traditions. A seminal example is the late Palestinian-American theorist Edward Said, one of the most influential intellectuals of the 20th century and an unremitting scourge of Western civilization. In Orientalism, Said excoriates Western thinkers for their systemic prejudices about non-Western culture and decries the West's centuries-old desire to conquer and subdue the Orient. From Homer to Plato onward, Said argues, Western thinkers have imagined the Orient as exotic, sensual, mysterious, feminine, and irrational in order to sharpen their own self-image as rational, dominant, and masculine. Said had little interest in an even-handed account of the different prejudices civilizations harbor about each other. His ire was almost exclusively focused on the West. Even today, argued Said, Western political and academic institutions are deeply complicit in the imperialist project to dominate and erase the Oriental other. But surely, if Orientalist and Islamophobic prejudices had been as deep-rooted at Western universities as Said argued, there would have been a universal outcry against him. In fact, throughout his long career, Said was rewarded with numerous prizes, awards, and distinguished professorships at universities like Berkeley, Yale, and Johns Hopkins. Orientalism was not originally published in the Orient. It rolled off the Western presses, and it was the Western intellectual elite who gave it the imprimatur of a modern classic. Even in Israel, a country that Said relentlessly attacked, Orientalism became required reading at universities, especially among the younger generation. By contrast, after Said had a falling out with Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat, his books were banned in the West Bank and Gaza, despite Said's indefatigable commitment to the Palestinian cause. There could scarcely be a more striking contrast between a hand that allows itself to be bitten and one that strikes back. Another example of such revolutionary posturing is the immense popular Slovenian philosopher, I could never pronounce his name no matter how you, let's see, Slavoj Žižek, renowned for making edgy arguments such as better the worst Stalinist terror than the most liberal capitalist democracy, and for stating that Adolf Hitler was not violent enough because his violence was not sufficiently essential. If anyone in Joseph Stalin's Soviet Union had dared to write that he preferred the worst capitalist exploitation over the most perfect communist paradise, he probably would have been whisked off to the gulag or summarily shot. But as the Dutch Somali writer Ayaan Hirsi Ali once fashionably told anti-Western journalists, you grew up in freedom, and you can spit on freedom because you do not know what it is like to not have freedom. Ironically, by the way, Ayaan Hirsi Ali is great. Ironically, many anti-Western intellectuals received succor from the very hand that they were biting. French postmodernist Michel Foucault wrote numerous books and articles decrying the cruelties and sinister power dynamics supposedly underpinning enlightened modern institutions like schools, prisons, hospitals, and mental asylums. The more morally enlightened something appeared, the more Foucault relished reducing it to a vehicle of power and domination. But when he was dying of AIDS, Foucault was cared for at the Hospital de la, I can't even pronounce this, I can't, whatever. You'd have to look that up, and I don't know how to pronounce it. The very same institution that occupies center stage in his work, Madness and Civilization. With his signature cynicism, Foucault described the humanitarian reforms that took place at that hospital after the French Revolution as a sinister exercise in bourgeois power discourse that was hardly better than medieval cruelties. Even the anti-colonial revolutionary theorist Franz Fanon was flown to a hospital in Washington, D.C. by the imperialist CIA to receive cutting-edge treatment for his leukemia. Don't even get me started on how many Palestinians the Israeli medical establishment has helped over the years. It's a shocking number, let me tell you. Don't get me wrong. I would not want to live in a society in which no one can afford to bite the hand that feeds them. Tolerance of relentless self-criticism is precisely what made the Enlightenment so successful. In that sense, we should indeed love our enemies, as Jesus counseled. We should cherish the naysayers. The more mud they fling, the better. Anti-capitalists, postmodern relativists, and Putin apologists are canaries in the free speech coal mine. We should start worrying if they suddenly fall silent. Still, although self-criticism is important if we want to learn from our mistakes, ritual self-flagellation is not just unproductive, but actively harmful, especially when it involves glorifying alternatives that would make us all much worse off. A healthy body needs a robust immune system to protect it from infections. But if that immune system is overzealous, it will wreak the body's destruction. Enemies of liberal democracy like Vladimir Putin, Xi Jinping, and the Ayatollah Khomeini must be rubbing their hands with glee as they watch us disarm ourselves without a fight. They don't even have to denounce our free societies. We've already indicted ourselves. Although this may appear to be a battle between defenders and critics of the West, there is nothing exclusively Western about modernity. The Enlightenment is an immensely powerful collection of ideas, which happen to have originated in some corners of Western Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries, but which have universal appeal and have since taken root in many different cultures and geographical settings. In fact, non-Westerners like Ayaan Hirsi Ali are often especially appreciative of the blessings of liberal democracy and industrial modernity because they have first-hand experience of what it means to be deprived of them. It's only those who have enjoyed freedom and prosperity their whole lives who tend to behave like spoiled brats. And that article was by Martin Baudry, and that was published on Quillette. Now, I know, not a whole lot about movies there, but they were thoughts that I've had, especially over the last 2 years since October 7th, where it gets increasingly annoying to live in Western civilization. But this article does a very good job to remind us all that the fact that we are free to criticize, to discuss, to yell and scream and rage and complain and talk about Zack Snyder's Superman as opposed to James Gunn's Superman, all of those things are the same because they mean that we live in a society where it is okay and we are able to have free, expressive thought that we can all share with one another. And as this article points out, the day we don't have that anymore is the day that we're all really, really in trouble. So, you Snyder cultists, you go right on. You go right on yelling at me on Twitter. You go right on calling me a gunner shill or whatever the hell you call me. You know what? I just want to see a fucking good and entertaining Superman movie. That's it. And you know why this Superman movie is going to win? Because it's a 4-quadrant family film. And kids are going to demand to see it more than once. And I haven't even seen this fucking thing. There was another test screening tonight. I don't think we're going to hear what people thought, but people like Scott Mance went tonight. A lot of people saw it. You know, and it's going to be divisive. People are going to be screaming and yelling and talking, and this one's better than that one. I mean, hell, man, I'm a James Bond fan. If you're a James Bond fan and you've watched all 25 official James Bond movies, and I'll throw Never Say Never Again, in, and I'll throw the Casino Royale, the parody movie in from the 60s. I'll throw it in. But to be a James Bond fan is to understand the difference between good and bad within the same continuum. Because, I mean, for every Honor Majesty's Secret Service, you get a Diamonds Are Forever. What can I say? Sometimes one right after the other, and you're like, what the fuck? But Western civilization, we got it going on. And you know what? Certainly not perfect, but it's the best we've got. And the more we can try and make it better, the better off we're all going to be. I will never vote for anybody that tells me that we're going to have city-run grocery stores. That's the dumbest shit I've ever heard in my life. And it hasn't worked in the past. So, I know this wasn't my normal bill of fare, but I figured rather than me choke out a few political ideas and someone saying, stick to Star Trek, Rob, I figured I'd find some articles I like to read. There you go. And, I really didn't answer Mr. Z's, Mr. Z, let me go back to Mr. Z's question. He asked a really great question. What are your thoughts on Denis Villeneuve's Bond regarding Gen Z, Gen Alpha sensibilities? Look, James Bond, to quote Judi Dench, is a sexist, misogynist dinosaur, a product of the Cold War. Gen Z and Gen Alpha sensibilities, I think, are kind of a dead end. On one hand, they're probably more progressive and they're more accepting of all different kinds of people than any other generation in history, so good for them. But on the other hand, they're also really infantilized, and I think they're too coddled. Maybe this will change, but they haven't had to deal with getting their hands dirty. And I think a character like James Bond, by definition, gets his hands dirty. He literally has a license to kill and will do so at the drop of a hat if necessary. And when you're a character like that, and you know that your life could come to an end at any moment, you're going to appreciate the finer things in life because you might be deprived of them at any moment. That's why Bond loves beautiful women. That's why Bond loves great food. That's why Bond loves great cars. That's why Bond appreciates a great firearm. That's why Bond is incredibly well educated, because the world that he's protecting, he thinks, in my mind, that is a wondrous place. I think younger people today take a lot of the world they live in for granted. They have no idea what it means that they're going to lose their life at any moment. They don't even understand. I mean, I don't even think people are so terrified of, like, James Bond is also probably a phenomenal fuck. I mean, why? Because he probably approaches every woman as a work of art and wants to, not only does he want to literally uncover their secrets, but he wants to delve into what they want and how to, I think that James Bond is probably one of the great lovers of all time, because he's going to leave a woman knowing that no one has ever gone down on me the way James Bond did. James Bond knows what's up, the same way he knows about food and great wine. He knows how to make a woman come harder than she's ever come before. Now, they've never actually dealt with that, and because in the 60s, it's a lot, very much misogynistic. But I know what's up. James Bond is like Captain fucking Kirk. These are not men that take what they want. These are men that leave women wanting them. They're like the perfect campground people. You always leave a campground better than you found it. James fucking Bond and James fucking Kirk. The James bros. They're the best at what they do, man. The best at what they do. At least, that's how I'd like to believe. In my fictional world, that's my philosophy. So there you go. So here's the idea. It's really interesting. When The Living Daylights came out, a lot was made that came out in 1987, and AIDS was fairly new, ravaging the world. And Olivia Dabo's character, Bond had one woman. He wasn't just bedding down, because they wanted to show that even James Bond was supposed to be conscious of the fact that you could no longer live in the casual world that James Bond lived in. And I understood that. But the thing is, James Bond is a fantasy character. And, I'm sure he does practice safe sex. But on the other hand, he also knows that, and by the way, Bond probably goes to the doctor. He gets checked all the time. He knows he's clean. So it was, I don't know. I don't necessarily think that James Bond can work in the modern age. I'll be very curious to see what Denis Villeneuve will do with the James Bond character. I don't know. Darth Plato says that there's a term for this. Hesperphobia. I didn't know that. Shonen Kaiju says children who've never known peace have different values than children who've never known war. Doflamingo from One Piece. That's a great quote. I love that quote. By the way, can I just say that I've gone down an anime rabbit hole? I went down an anime rabbit hole. Monster from 2004. It's like 74 episodes. It's on Netflix. Oh my good God. Unbelievable. And of course, if you watch Monster, the author will lead you right to where? Pluto. Pluto. Monster's like 23 minutes an episode. So stick with it. Just give me at least 10 episodes. It takes a while to unfold and you see where it's going, but then it goes zzz. Wow. But Pluto is one of the finest science fiction. I know it's anime. Some people don't dig it, but trust me, trust Uncle Bob on this one. You got to check out Pluto. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. It does not replace my beloved Legends of the Galactic Heroes, 110 episodes of bliss, of OVA bliss. But Pluto, as a science fiction fan, if you love Blade Runner and you love artificial people and the idea, oh my God, Pluto is unbelievable. Shonen Kaiju, that's your name just made me think of that. And One Piece. Joshua Gonzalez says, I'm in New York City. I don't know what to do if Namdani wins. Well, I don't either. I mean, I don't understand. The guy was a rapper, an anti-Semitic rapper, and he's a democratic socialist, which in de Blasio, I mean, you've had that happen. You've seen, what's going to happen. City-run grocery stores. This is what I always love about when people talk about like socialism. Well, you have to have the workers owning the means of production. Well, how do you think the means of production got there? Where did they come from? Who built them? Who insures them? Who pays for their upkeep and their maintenance? It's such a weird. I've just never understood it. I don't. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. Thomas Logan asks me to describe my first experience watching View to a Kill, which is just celebrating its 40th anniversary. I can tell you exactly where I saw View to a Kill. I'll tell you. So in Washington State, this is 40 years ago this month. Might have been a little earlier because we used to be able to see movies. I was not supposed to be there. But so in Washington State, they had a thing called a blind bidding law, where because movie theater chains had gotten they would bid for movies that they hadn't seen, and if a movie was bad, they would lose their shirts on a movie. So they had passed a law where movie theater chain owners or theater owners would get to see a movie before it came out. So they could then have, when they bid on our movie theater chain, we'll give you this much to show it. So A View to a Kill so I have a friend named Craig Hyland, still a very good friend of mine. He was let into all of these screenings. And they usually happen, one at 10 o'clock in the morning and one at like 2 in the afternoon or 1 in the afternoon. Craig would take me to these screenings if it was something I wanted to see. And he says, you got to come to this screening, and I'm not going to tell you what it is, but we're going to go. And Craig and I are fanatical Bond fans. And it was so funny. I walked in, and on the film cans of the print, it said fresh broccoli on it. I knew exactly what it was because it was coming out fresh broccoli because of, Albert broccoli. And so I watched it. I watched it in the screening room that was right down the stairs from the Seattle Times building in downtown Seattle. That's where I watched A View to a Kill for the first time. And you know what? I didn't like it. I thought it was a bad movie. I mean, a fire engine chase in San Francisco. I kind of liked the beginning. Obviously, I like Binder's title sequence with Duran Duran in it, but it was... Look, Patrick McNee is in it. It just seemed like all of these things that they would have turned into action set pieces, but because Roger Moore was just too old as Bond. And, the whole climax and Silicon Valley and all, it was just not good. I did not like View to a Kill. But that's okay. But it was a Bond movie, and I would see any Bond movie. I didn't care. But that, Thomas, was the first time I saw View to a Kill. Mars73 says, hey, Rob, thank you for reading this article. It was great. I think about having these types of conversations are great. Changing topics, talking about movies collections, Kaleidoscape or physical media. Thanks. Okay, Kaleidoscape, if you don't know what Kaleidoscape is, it is a digital service where you can download, they have a ton of 4K things right from the studios. And you have a thing where I think you can put your physical media up on Kaleidoscape, but it's like a server. I don't have it, but I've seen it and played with it. It's dope. I mean, it's really great. And if I had more money, I would definitely get a Kaleidoscape system. I think they can work in tandem with physical media, but you can get things that aren't out on physical media yet. I think Kaleidoscape is great, and I'm a big fan of it. It's expensive, though. Although it's coming down. They've got like a new portable Kaleidoscape system. But I would use them in tandem, you know. Zale sends in a $35 super chat. Why, thank you. That's very, very kind of you. Hey, Rob, I just wanted you to know that you are appreciated. I may not agree with every viewpoint, but I've always enjoyed you since John Campea. I love seeing you on Film Threat Versus and the discussions you guys have. You rock. Well, Zale, thank you. You know, like I say, I'm not everybody's jar of jam. But look, my whole thing is this. I like people. I do. And I like discourse. I like movies. And most of all, I like storytelling. Because my poison of choice, I've got some... Actually, you know what? Check this out. You know what I'm drinking? Look at this. It's red wine. Now, I've been told that this comes... I'm going to keep this bottle. This comes from the Coppola Winery. I mean, I'm a sucker for this. There's 3 different ones. They've got a sparkling wine, they've got a white wine, and this is a red blend. But look at this. It's got a raised Amity Island red. I mean, come on. Yeah, I had to get this bottle for the actual... I was supposed to go to Martha's Vineyard, and I couldn't. So that's what I'm having. I'm drinking a little Amity Island red. Amity means friendship. You yell barracuda. People say, huh? What? You yell shark. You've got a panic on your hand on the 4th of July. But thank you, Zale. I appreciate that. Roger gave 5 Burnettwork gift memberships. Now, we have a member call every other week. We had a member call last week. That was fun. We'll have another one not next week, but the week after. Who's a better lover, Bond or Austin Powers? Vrock408 asks. Bond. Austin Powers is a selfish lover. He thinks he's a great lover, but Bond is the man. You know, don't count Bond out. Anyway, I got a few more letters I wanted to read. I read Isaac's, which I really, really liked. This one comes from Dominic Gonzalez. Hello, Rob. I hope all is well. My name is Dominic, and I've been a long-time viewer and now second-time emailer. Your call to action for stories about wonder sparked my interest. There was a look into your life you shared not long ago about your relationship with action figures. Your home, at the sometimes inconvenience to the rest of your family and potted plants, was your playground. I really resonated with what you shared and how you take playtime seriously. It's no doubt to this day that has informed the way you view the world and create your projects for the rest of us to consume. I wanted to share a story about my relationship with action figures and how I swore them away and have recently accepted them back into my life because, well, wonder. I, too, took playtime seriously. I specifically remember an era where I would dedicate an hour or two to playtime, paying attention to my alarm clock and stopping scenes at the 30-minute mark. I was making episodes. At the age of 13, I would write out episode titles and short descriptions. I had seasons mapped out before I even began playing. I knew where all my characters were going, and the fun was improvising how to get there. I totally relate to that. I love Star Wars, superheroes, and Transformers. When I would play, I made sure to keep each franchise apart. However, an episode of the Ben 10 Cartoon Network animated series introduced me to the multiverse. Now my Jedi figures would fall out of hyperspace and into Cybertron. They'd be intercepted by Decepticons and rescued by the Autobots. I had existential conversations limited by my 13-year-old brain between Optimus Prime and Obi-Wan. That sounds awesome. Moreover, my Jedi or superhero action figures would meet their much smaller Lego counterparts. The possibilities were truly endless. As I played, I would imagine audience reactions to the scenes unfolding. Whoa, that was cool. No, not him. And more reactions would almost subconsciously be playing in my head. At times, even I fell victim to the nostalgia trope or to fan service for my imaginary audience to appreciate. I totally relate to that. It was also at this time that I just naturally fell off on the larger action figures and played almost exclusively with my Lego figures. I continued to collect and play with my figures until sophomore year of high school. It felt like I just hit my stride. In fact, it felt like in all aspects of my life because I finally had my first official girlfriend. Official as in meeting parents and holding hands outside of the playground or cafeteria. This was the real deal. I could marry this girl. I'm a man now. Something changed in my brain chemistry, and I now felt like I had no choice but to let go of my action figures, Legos, all of it. Well, you had the ultimate action figure now. For the next 4 months, I sold all my toys through an old Facebook Marketplace-like app. There were a few Lego figures like Polybag exclusives and a Deadpool, along with 2 specific action figures, a C-3PO and a Snowtrooper, that were handed down to me ages ago that I couldn't let go of. I ended up saving them in a Ziploc bag and hiding them away in my closet. My relationship with my girlfriend was short-lived after that. Perhaps my slow resentment of growing up had the best of me. The funny thing was, I was never sure if my girlfriend at the time would be okay with my action figures. I never gave her the chance to form an opinion. In the months and years and relationships following, I never rebuilt my figure collection. I would just sift through my Ziplocs and reminisce. I'm 25 now, and I've shared this story with my current girlfriend of over a year. She's been trying to wake up the child in me by walking through Lego or action figure aisles with me whenever we visited Target or Walmart. I like to see how things have progressed. I like to look at the figures I didn't have because they weren't made yet. And I joke about how I'd still make do and just pretend to figure with someone else, or in the case of Legos, I'd customize my own version. You should get it, my girlfriend would insist. By the way, she sounds like a keeper to me. Still, I never did. Well, I made my first Lego purchase in over a decade this month. You're a good man. Star Wars had officially released a new version of their Lego Plo Koon figure, my favorite Jedi character. This figure was fully equipped with a new head mold and more detailed printing. The icing on the cake was this figure was exclusive to a very inexpensive set. It was a micro build, the most satisfying $15 I've spent in a while. I don't think I'll ever go back to fully rebuilding my Lego collection, or action figure collection for that matter. However, from time to time, I'll probably pick up an exclusive poly bag or micro build. The wonder lives on, however. It has probably just evolved into filmmaking for me now. I've directed a few documentaries, good for you, man, and I look forward to making more. Thank you for continuing to inspire imagination connoisseurs like myself. I hope this email was at least fairly interesting, and thank you for reading. And that comes to us from Dominic Gonzalez. Well, Dominic, what a great letter. I mean, you know, that's what's so great about this show. See? Every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. But that's a great letter. You know, it's funny. I mean, I've never given it up. You know, I don't know. For me, it was always like, because I used all the action figures and model kits and stuff to tell stories, they were always kind of, it was fuel to the fire. And I, you know, still buying stuff. They're just, the stuff they make now is so cool. It's never been more inspirational. You know, I mean, I just love it. You know, I don't know what people are going to do with this. If I got hit by a bus, people are going to walk in here and be like, wow, what is all this stuff? But that was a great letter. I love that letter. I think I'm going to read one more letter. And, let's see. This one comes from Carrie Van Castle Cook, who's written letters before. Oh, you know what? I'm going to save this one. This one's a good one. It's about 28 weeks later. I'm going to read that on a different time. Yeah, I'm just going to leave it there, everybody. I think I'm going to leave it there. It's midnight. I got to get up early and take care of the dogs and go be on the John Campea show tomorrow. And I have another. By the way, if you guys haven't listened to the Designing Hollywood podcast, Julian Day, who's the costume designer on F1, and he's also doing Edgar Wright's upcoming The Running Man, the readaptation of the Stephen King's Bachman book. I just dropped that today. I thought it was a great conversation. He was really interesting to listen to. And he's from the UK, and he began his costume designing career. We had 12-inch G.I. Joes here, but in the UK they had Action Man. And the thing about Action Man was you could buy like DC superhero costumes for Action Man. Like Action Man could be like a G.I. Joe, but you could buy a bunch of different other licensed, like he was a figure, but you could buy the superhero suits and put them on him, so Action Man could be. I had a few James Bond Action Man sets, but Action Man was cool. But Julian Day talks about that's how he began his costume designing career. Was he was making his mother make Action Man costumes. It's a really interesting interview. He's a really great guy, and it's interesting because he talks about Rush. He did Ron Howard's Formula One movie Rush, which is a period piece, and how that differed from what they're doing with F1. So you can see that on the John Campea channel. It's Designing Hollywood. It just was put up today, so it's easy to find. It's to the top of his video list. But check it out if you're at all interested, and if you have seen F1, I think you'll get a kick out of it. I want to thank everybody for writing letters in. I want to thank people for generously supporting this channel via super chats and tips and memberships and all that. Thanks for listening to me. If I'm gonna speak about politics or something, if I can find articles, Western civilization, fuck yeah, America. It's like Team America World Police. But if I can do that, that's how. I don't know if I could ever express myself that eloquently, but there you go. But thanks for listening to that, and I want to thank my moderating staff, Tom Jr. Jackson, Darth Plato, anybody who's here. Thanks for being great. And I'll be back tomorrow night. We are going to do Dave Parker's going to come on, and we're doing a Midnight Metal on Saturday about Fantastic Four and Superman, bringing back the fun. Yeah, there's nothing more metal than fun, right? And on that note, remember, I've said it many times tonight, but every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear, and all you have to do is listen. I will have more information on the White Devils screening. It's not going to cost much, like $8. I have to figure out how do we do all that, and how much it's going to cost me to have like thousands of people if they want to watch it. And then we're going to have the conversation afterwards. So that'll be pretty cool. White Devils, man. You'll be one of the first audiences to ever see it. So, I mean, it's not for everybody. It's truly indie. It's truly micro budget, but you might get a kick out of it. And hey, what other YouTube channel has, feature films to watch? So there you go. From the team that brought you Tango Shalom comes White Devils. Why don't we go out and I'll play that trailer one more time.
I'm Mr. Grove from Pretoria. Is everything all right? People talk, say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front door.
Who says you weren't?
Them.
Who?
Them.
It was terrible out there. I could hear breathing.
We told you.
Are you worried about the man?
They hate us. That's the truth. They want to kill and torture every one of us. You can see it in their eyes.
Come now, Frederick. Do you dream about unholy things?
I really don't like what's going on here. There's something wrong, and that's a fact.
Wait. What did you dream last night? This manifestation of evil. You must be delivered from evil.